Thank you. Hope everybody enjoyed lunch. This afternoon, it is my distinct honor to introduce our next speaker, Major General Dennis Bythewood. With a distinguished career spanning over 3 decades, Major General Bythewood has been at the forefront of space operations and strategic development. He currently serves as a special assistant to the Chief of Space Operations, where he plays a pivotal role in shaping the future of our nation's space capabilities. Throughout his career, Major General Bythewood has demonstrated exceptional leadership in both operational command and acquisition roles. He has commanded space operations at various levels, including as a commander of the Joint Task Force Space Defense, where he was responsible for protecting and defending Allied space systems. His expertise in space acquisitions is equally noteworthy, having led programs as a material leader, system program director, and program executive officer. Major General Bythewood's comprehensive experience uniquely positions him to provide valuable perspectives into the U.S. Space Force's budget planning and strategic objectives. Please join me in welcoming Major General Dennis Bythewood.
Good afternoon, welcome back from lunch. So I've got my little iPad here, which I hear will put questions from the audience up in front of me. But I've got 15 minutes, and so we'll see how many questions we get to. Hey, I wanted to talk to you about a couple things over the course of the next 15 minutes. One, an extremely high level budget, right? And kind of where our investments have been as we look at the 25 side of the house. And I'll preface this by, the 26 budget is still a work in progress. As the new administration comes in and looks at priorities across that bowl, then we'll come out as we go in the future. So throwing questions in here about the 26 budget, we'll probably keep those at below the line. But we'll carry everything else as we can. And I know we had a good conversation this morning about DSO and really maneuver operations and the importance of maneuver as we go through that. So I'm going to cross that off my 15 minutes of talking through. But what you'll find is it is foundational, right, to what we need to do as a service and as a nation as we think about how we operate within this space domain. And that thread comes through all of our operations, whether that be through mobility, right, logistics, all the way through operations within the orbit. I'm sure we talked a good bit about the threat this morning, and I'll reiterate just a couple of pieces within that line, right? As we look at the pacing challenge of China and Russian operations in space over the last 5 to 10 years, right? Well, what we've seen is a consistent growth. And that activity really then spurs what you see within the service and the service's priorities as we walk down that line. From both nations testing anti-satellite missiles that can reach out into low Earth orbit and all the way out to geosynchronous orbit, right? And to what I like to view as the grappling activity that we've seen from China in geo. On one hand, you could call it one man's responsible actions in space of moving defunct satellites out of the geo belt and into a parking orbit. But one man's responsible movement of a defunct satellite can also be the next man's irresponsible movement of a fully operational satellite right into the same junkyard. And so we look at those kind of activities, things that are happening on what you could call the civil side in many things, also could have a military application, and those military applications are important to us. So we watch those very closely. And then certainly all of the electronic warfare that we've seen within from Russia within the Ukraine conflict that peaks as we walk down this line and really highlights the impact of terrestrial operations, right, in the space domain and how that impacts warfighting. And then the other thread that has come through all of that is just the clear realization, both worldwide, right, from armed forces across the globe, and certainly within our own services, of the importance of space to operations. We talked about, the first time that GPS-guided munitions were used and were able to really hone in and drive precision, right, combat, minimization of collateral damage, right, as we walk through those things. Those were all important steps as we go through. But the long-range effects of warfare that we see now hinge on the ability to move data over large distances, sense the environment, and understand how targets are moving within any domain, the air domain, the ground domain, and so on. And so it ties together the intelligence sensing parts of our nation with the warfighting parts of our nation as we walk through that thing, and the integration of all of that capability. I think clearly over the last 2 years, what you'd find from any of the other service chiefs talking to the CSO is how pivotal space operations and what US Space Force brings to the fight, and what US Space Command does as they execute those operations on orbit and across the globe, to enabling the Navy and the Army and the Air Force to do the missions that they've been laid out to do. So that's good. How is that translated to budget, you might ask, right? If it is so pivotal. The answer is not as much as we would like. And we certainly are carrying that message forward as we walk down the line. Some might look back at the stand-up of the service and see the initial, doubling of the budget over the early years, and I'd tell you that's a false flag kind of way to look at that budget. That budget doubling was simply a matter of bringing the Space Development Agency, Army programs, and others that transferred into the Space Force in. And when they came in, they brought their budget. The budget has grown, right, but not at those levels as we've walked down the line. In 2025, as we saw, the budget that is over to the Hill is actually less than the 2024 budget, the first time we've seen it decrease from the Space Force. The themes, coming out of the service are the same, and they're the important ones that you guys have been hearing this morning and will continue to hear over the course of today. We need to invest right within this domain and be able to protect it, right, from adversary operations that would look to limit our ability to operate, and to be able to ensure that we can do the things necessary for our other services to be able to operate effectively in their domains. We're carrying that message very strongly forward, and we're trying to make the sound investments as we walk down that line. But stable budgets isn't what gets us to success in those lines, right? At least a doubling, if not more, of the Space Force budget is warranted to do the missions that we've been asked to do, and we'll continue to advocate for that as we move forward. Beyond budget, right, the service has also been spending the last year looking through how does it drive the organizational changes necessary to think about the future of operations. One of the tasks that I've had over the last year is to help the CSO think through what we call our Space Futures Command, what that might look like and carry forward. Let me share a little bit about that with you, and then I'll dive into some questions. We've spent the last year, as I said, walking through what does this structure look like. Effectively, what we want to be able to do, which we do in pockets, but we haven't done it in an integrated fashion at the level that we need to, is think through the concepts of operations for 5, 10, 15 years out. Where's technology going to be? Where are our adversaries likely to move towards? How is that impacted by economic factors, technology factors, policy implications, other things that might drive a future operating environment as we look at it, that we might have to conduct offensive or defensive operations within. And then from understanding of that environment, building out what are the concepts that allows the service to move forward. Think of that as a mixture of what is the kit we need from robust satellite communications that can move large amounts of data in very quickly from any point on the surface of the Earth or anywhere within the domains to others, to sensing of the environment on space as we look at more and more, as General Shaw mentioned this morning, right? These maneuver forces, right? So it's just not the United States that is looking about how do we incorporate maneuver into our operations, right? Our adversaries are looking at this as well. And as we look at maneuvering pieces, we need to be able to sense that space environment at a level that we haven't had to in the past. If I could look up with a space domain awareness architecture and find something 2 or 3 times a day and construct an orbit out of that, that's fine for non-maneuvering forces. But if the answer is I have maneuvering forces, I need to pay attention to that and build out that capability. That's high on our list. So understanding how those things come together in operations is a key part of the concepts. Laying on top of that, what are the people that we need in order to execute those? How are they going to be organized to best effect to integrate with multi-domain forces from the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force as we walk forward? What are the policies that are important to actually enable those operations to happen? what training is necessary for those folks to operate internal to the service on just operating the kit and interacting with each other, and what joint training is necessary to make sure that we're ready when U.S. Space Command or any of the other combatant commanders need us to operate together as part of a joint task force, maybe with the Navy as they conduct maneuver operations, or tied together for air domain operations. All of those things become part of these future concepts as we look at them. Both simple in the mindset of trying to get a task done, but robust in the sense that we really have to understand the architectural implications of that across the entire service and how it integrates with other services. And then from that, being able to carry that into war games and exercises to really test the theories that we put on paper and thought about in a relevant environment. Understand what those interactions are, make modifications to those concepts as we walk down the line, and changes into what we would call our future force design. And then from those wargaming, actually then going in and doing what I'd call round one of a government reference architecture of the entire service and how it integrates with other services. So the Space Warfighting and Analysis Center has been doing this work for us for years and have been amazing at it. But what we haven't been able to do is drive full integration of that across all of those different threads, burden it with all of the capabilities that would be necessary to fight those forces effectively, and then carry that forward. From there, the Futures Command then hands off that product in a sense, monitors it, guides it, and helps make sure that the service stays focused on getting to this future environment, while our acquisition community and our requirements community starts to break that apart and turn that into the programs, right, that we'd exit across this line. So that's the focus as we drive across those things, taking the disparate things that we've done over the course of Air Force Space Command while it existed in the beginnings of the U.S. Space Force, and bring those together in a cohesive manner under one organization that can drive synchronization of all of that as it moves forward. What we expect to be able to do from that, tying back to budgets in the end, is make sure that we understand from an integrated fashion what the implications are of different budgetary choices, both now and as we look into the future. Understand what science and technology investments are most appropriate and critical to realizing that future objective force, and helping them to guide with SAF-AQ, SAF-SQ, AFRL, and others, the science and technology field across that line. As was mentioned this morning, the idea of this being through partnerships and with our allies is baked in from the beginning, right? Air Marshal Godfrey has been working hard on our international partnership strategy. Our team's been engaged throughout that process. We envision, that this future-looking team is a core piece of that work, engaging with allies, partner, and industry well before we get to the idea of building things. What are the concepts that are out there? Where do we have both risks to realizing the future and opportunities that we can invest in early days, and then tying those things together. So it is a broad spectrum. It's a lot of work as that team will kick off and do those things. I think we've got a lot of people that are engaged in that mix now that we will be pulling into that team as we go forward, and then continuing to grow it as the fourth field command within the service over the next couple of both weeks, months, and years. All right, so that rounds out, kind of the thought of those pieces as it goes. I think what you'll hear today from the rest of the panelists as we go forward is you start to get to much more of this future-looking piece. And I challenge you within all of those lines to be thinking about how are we making sure that we cover all the gamuts, from a policy, from an organization, from how we operate to how we support those operations. For this team here, as we look at mobility across that line, the logistics of supporting those forces, to be honest, whether they are terrestrially dispersed or dispersed on orbit. And both, as we discussed this morning, and I'm sure we'll discuss more, the implications of being able to rapidly launch new capability as we walk into that line, and/or have that capability resonant on orbit in a manner that allows it to move into operations quite quickly. The gamut is wide as we look at those opportunities. Part of our look as we look into the futures is to be able to trade those options and understand how those things are laid out. And then hopefully be able to lay the investments in the structure in that will drive us in a direction that makes the most use to be a fully capable and effective warfighting force that can support our COCOM operations across the board. All right, I now have 2 minutes, and I will hit a couple questions. So the Breaking Defense article indicated that the Space Force didn't have plans to fund service in the 26 budget. I love that it got upward to the top. Look, the 26 budget isn't out, right? The administration, as it comes in, has a chance to adjust that budget as they see fit. The service is working across all of our normal paths to do that. And so it is interesting, what someone thinks about the 26 budget, but I'd argue the 26 budget is not out of the offices of the president and sent over to Congress yet. So it's hard to know what's going to be in it until it has been sent. What I think is a key theme within that question and the broader set is trades get made every time. And if you dial back to my opening lines on, I think the budget is at least half the size that it would need to be in order for us to effectively do all the missions that we've been given. It would be no surprise that there are pieces within that budget that any one of us could look at and say, hey, that's not adequately funded for where we want to be. We know that. That's why we're advocating for all of the activities that we need to do across the spectrum, making sure that those are tied in with our other services warfighting plans, and making sure that we can drive that line through the Department of Defense and up through the Office of the President, and then ultimately over to Congress. And so those trades will be coming out as we look forward. We will continue to advocate for effective funding to get the job done that's been laid out for us. For the second one was asking about the Space Force instructed to freeze funding on projects. I haven't seen any of that. I've been on the road since yesterday, and so I'll, if anybody has seen anything newer, I'll defer that one to them. But that's not been lined into me. The third one is about, and I'll end with that. When will the SWAC prioritize including analyzing the SAML within a mission area? So the Futures Command, as it stands up, will incorporate that into our designs as baseline, right? How are we supporting the force that we need to deliver onto orbit? And in my mind, in two factors. One, how are we logistically supporting a baseline force that might be doing consistent operations with what I would call relative maneuver, but maybe not quite as dynamic as General Shaw probably lined out this morning. And secondly to that, and in many cases more important just because it's dynamic nature, how do we incorporate the dynamic maneuver that we know we will need if a conflict extended into space into our baseline, which includes planning for launch operations, logistics that supports those launch operations, rapidly being able to vet out and present on-orbit capability into operations, not on the hours of weeks and months, or to be honest, even days, but probably in the hours time frame as we walk down that line, so we can rapidly respond to any impact as we go forward. That's baked into the ideas that we're already been teed up that we'll be analyzing as we walk through this next phase, and will be a key spot as we go forward. So I will end there, and I do plan on being here for a good bit of this afternoon, and I'll probably be along one of these walls. So if anybody's got a question that I didn't get to, feel free to hunt me down, and I'm more than happy to walk through it. Thanks again for having me here. I look forward to seeing this afternoon's pitch, and I wish I could stay for the rest of the week and see what the team's got laid out. It looks like a really good session. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Major General Bythewood, for sharing your perspectives this afternoon.